Greetings and welcome back to Module 3 of the series called Applying Positive Psychology and Other Helpful Strategies to the Well-Being of Child Welfare Workers. My name is Amy Krentzman.
And I'm Toni Tonetti.
And again, this is Module 3, which we're calling Pour from a Full Can. And we'll say some words about what we mean by that. You might have seen this image, I think it was being passed around Facebook recently, image of an empty cup, like one you would see at a diner, with the words, "You can't pour from an empty cup, take care of yourself first." And that's kind of the idea that we've been working from. In Module 2, as you recall, we called that Fill Your Watering Can, and in that module, we provided strategies from the gratitude research and the research on behavioral activation and positive activity scheduling. And we recommended a daily journaling practice where you can actually put those actions and activities to use and start to fill your can, take care of yourself by employing some of these practices that have an evidence base for improving well-being. And perhaps after you've been doing the journaling practice for a few weeks, you return now to us for Module 3, where we talk about how you can work with others in a way that now that your can is full, you can help others by pouring from a full can. So here in this third module, we're going to be talking about, not necessarily in this order, we're going to be talking about reflective supervision, Carl Rogers, research on listening, positive communication skills, and then again, recommendations for putting it to use. So this is a way to take some of the learnings that we've been describing in Module 2 and talking about how they can be used to help improve the well-being of others in the workplace and specifically in the supervisory relationship. I'm going to start by talking about Carl Rogers and the concept of reflective listening. I'm guessing this may be review for most people who work in child welfare, but I find it useful to go back and review and talk about maybe some additional information that you might not have been exposed to when you first learned about reflective listening and Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers lived from 1902 to 1987. He was the founder of what's called the client-centered approach to counseling. In his day, his ideas were radical. We've come now to so fully accept everything that he has written about and talked about that oftentimes you can hear his ideas in a social work textbook and there isn't even a citation to him because his ideas have become incorporated so deeply into what is good counseling. So what were some of his ideas related to the client-centered approach? His ideas were that to produce beneficial change in another person, to be of maximum helpfulness to that other person, then 3 conditions must be met at the same time. And those 3 conditions are feeling a sense of unconditional positive regard toward the other person, a feeling of empathy toward the other person, and those 2 things are kind of how we orient ourselves to the other person. But finally, there's this quality of genuineness, and that's how we relate to ourselves in that moment when we are present with another person. Let's take each of those one at a time. The first is empathy. Miller and Rolnick, in their textbook on reflective listening, 3rd edition, say that empathy is an active interest in and effort to understand the other's internal perspective, to see the world through her or his eyes. Rogers wrote that empathy is the idea of sensing the client's inner world of private personal meanings as if it were your own. Unconditional positive regard is the second condition. Unconditional positive regard is a warm acceptance toward the other person and a sense of that feeling being unconditional. There are no feelings of, I like you only if you are thus and so. An idea of prizing the other person. An idea of caring for the client as a separate person with permission to have his own feelings and his own experiences. And those ideas summarize the idea of the spirit of unconditional positive regard toward the other. There's some good news here, and that is that unconditional positive regard doesn't have to be practiced perfectly in order for it to work. Rogers wrote that complete unconditional positive regard would never exist except in theory. The most accurate statement is that the effective therapist experiences unconditional positive regard for the client during many moments of his contact with him. Unconditional positive regard exists as a matter of degree in any relationship. So that's good news for all of us. We don't have to do it perfectly and constantly all the time. If we hit it for several moments during a conversation, we're in good shape. The third condition is genuineness, and that is being authentic, being true to ourselves. This idea of being congruent, and that relates to being a sense of integration. That is, that what I'm feeling, that I'm aware and accepting of what I'm feeling. Now, whether I express that to the other person or not is optional, but what I am feeling and my awareness of my own feeling and my acceptance of what I'm feeling is the idea here behind integration and congruence. And it's the opposite of presenting a facade. We're lucky here too because genuineness doesn't have to be perfect either in order for Rogers' formula to work well for us. It is not necessary, nor is it possible, that the therapist be a paragon who exhibits this degree of integration or wholeness in every aspect of his life. It is sufficient that he is accurately himself in this hour of the relationship, that in this basic sense, he is what he actually is in this moment in time. His experience may be, I am afraid of this client, or my attention is so focused on my own problems that I can scarcely listen to him. If the therapist is not denying these feelings to awareness, but is able freely to be them, as well as being his other feelings, then the condition we have stated is met. So there's a metaphor that I like to think about when I think about Rogers and his thinking that unconditional positive regard, empathy, and genuineness are the things we need in order to be of maximum helpfulness to another person. I think of the metaphor of wires that carry electricity. In this metaphor, the electricity, that is the actual magic, if you will, that makes power flow from one place to another. In Rogers' view, and in this metaphor, the electricity is the unconditional positive regard, the empathy, and the genuineness. That's the stuff that's flowing through the wires. And in this metaphor, the wire, the thing that carries those three magical components, is Carl Rogers' skill of reflective listening. So reflective listening is the thing that's carrying the energy, the electricity, which is the unconditional positive regard, the empathy, and the genuineness. So the practice of reflective listening can actually deliver these conditions. Now, we say more about this in a module we created last year for the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare here at the University of Minnesota. And you can feel free to go to your access to our modules and find the work we did on reflective listening last year. And what we have here for you is a toolkit for developing a workshop among your colleagues where reflective listening skills are refreshed and reviewed and practiced so that people can get back into the practice of using reflective listening if these skills have become rusty. So we invite you to turn to that module and use it if it would be of use to you. It will tell you everything you need to know and give you all the supplies you need to create a 1-hour workshop for colleagues. We conclude this section of the module with a wonderful quote from Miller and Rolnick in the 3rd edition of the Motivational Interviewing text. They say, reflective listening is a wonderfully useful skill, a cornerstone for client-centered counseling. It is also a useful skill not only in professional work, but also in one's personal life and relationships, and yet relatively few people master it. It is fundamental to good communication. Once you learn reflective listening, you have an invaluable gift to give to those with whom you come into contact.
So now we're going to present some research that has been done on listening. Graham Bodie is a professor of interpersonal communication at Louisiana State University. And in the LSU Listening Lab, he's employed some research methods that include surveys and experiments to focus on observable behaviors that people engage in when they are listening. And through this research, he's published several studies on listening and communication. So we're going to present some of his findings from these studies. So he's come up with a term called active empathic listening. And this is a listener's involvement in an interaction that is active, it's emotional, it's intentional, and it's something that can be perceived by the speaker. In active empathic listening, the listener uses cognitive processes, the active portion of that, and they also use both verbal and nonverbal behaviors, which Bodie calls verbal person-centeredness and nonverbal immediacy. Some things to note about active empathic listening is that the verbal communication may be more important to this than the nonverbal communication, as Bodie has found in multiple studies. However, both verbal and nonverbal communication should be present for effective listening that positively impacts the speaker. So verbal person-centeredness is the degree to which verbal responses from the listener reflect, validate, and expand on the speaker's feelings and perspectives. Nonverbal immediacy are the nonverbal actions and behaviors that communicate involvement, attentiveness, and awareness. These are things such as head nodding, eye contact, and leaning forward that let the speaker know that the listener is really paying attention. Some benefits of active listening include an increase in emotional awareness. Doing this really helps the listener tune in to what the speaker is saying. It contributes to the speaker's perception of helpful emotional support, and feeling listened to can improve one's well-being and physical health. Good listening skills can increase the possibility of better partnerships and organizational climate, which then impact job satisfaction, commitment, and productivity, and can really make the workplace itself more positive. And it's not only the speaker who benefits from active listening. The person listening may also show positive outcomes when they're using these supportive listening skills. And finally, active listening is actually expected. If the listener does not use these skills, it may be harmful to the speaker's perception of them. So we are going to talk about reflective supervision. And the research on listening really comes into play in this concept. We will explain what this is, and how reflective listening is really something that a good supervisor can do with their supervisee. So reflective supervision is a supervisory relationship that invites intentional exploration of what the worker sees, hears, and does in practice, as well as their emotional response to the work they do, and their personal history that is awakened by the work. Reflective supervision is a clinical approach to supervision. It builds self-awareness and really allows clinicians to understand their own thoughts and emotions, and in this way they will be better able to understand those of their clients. Reflective supervision promotes learning and a safe space to express feelings, and it promotes mutuality and relationship-based supervision and practice. So both the supervisor and the supervisee are invested in the relationship. And it supports professional use of self in practice so that the worker is aware of the experience of everyone involved, from the supervisor to themselves to the parent and child of the family that they're working with. And this quote really sums up kind of the essence of reflective supervision. Do unto others as you would have others do unto others. So the supervisor in this relationship is working with the supervisee in a way that they expect them to then work with their clients. The concept of a holding environment is something that comes into play very well in reflective supervision. This is a space where the worker can give voice to the powerful emotions that are often aroused by the work that they do. In this holding environment, the supervisor is fully present. They're not trying to fix the problem, and they're taking in the experiences and emotions of the worker without judgment, without reframing them, criticizing, or correcting them. They're really just hearing what the experience is of the worker. So by using reflective supervision, the workers may have experienced reduced stress and burnout because they feel supported, and this helps to replenish the reserves of the person being supervised. In this way, reflective supervision will ultimately benefit the clients who experience a relationship with an accepting, engaged, and caring professional. Through close listening in reflective supervision, the supervisor takes in the rawness that the supervisee presents and transforms it into thoughts and ideas which are reflected back to bring understanding of not only the supervisee's experience, but also that of their client. When workers are heard in supervision, they are then better prepared to listen to families, and their families end up feeling heard as well.
For the next part of this module, I'm going to run through a sequence of positive communication skills that I teach to Masters of Social Work students here at the University of Minnesota School of Social Work. And these are the skills that we suggest using. So this is a way of taking the science that you've just heard about and being able to practice it in your communication style with supervisees and with others in your life. And this is a way to nurture. This is a way of listening and communicating that nurtures the other person as well as is satisfying for you yourself. There are calming and soothing components to these skills related to listening, in part because it slows us down as the listener. And then there are benefits to us too as the listener for using these. So even though you're pouring from a full can and you're nurturing others, these skills also sustain and fill your own watering can as you use them. I draw from these skills from three main sources. The first is Direct Social Work Practice, Theory, and Skills, a very widely used social work textbook, in part written by my friend and colleague Ron Rooney. Number two, I draw from Motivational Interviewing, Helping People Change by Miller and Rolnick, the third edition textbook, which I highly recommend. And third, generally drawing from the work and influence of Carl Rogers. For example, his wonderful book On Becoming a Person. Now, the first set of skills that we don't have time to cover in depth in this 20-minute module are what Miller and Rolnick in their third edition of the Motivational Interviewing text call OARS, O-A-R-S. That is open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. And here we point out Carl Rogers' tool of reflective listening. That is, the client or your conversation partner says something, and you basically, with the spirit of unconditional positive regard, empathy, and genuineness, you reflect back to them verbally what they've said to you, sometimes in your own words. And this way you check with them, did I hear you? Did I hear what you just said? And it lets them know you're really listening. And just notice here that affirmations, reflections, and summaries are really all three different versions of reflections. And then we pair that with open-ended questions so that we give the person a wide space in which to talk to us. When we use closed-ended questions, we take a lot of the control for the direction of the conversation into our own hands, and we limit what the other person can say. So that's just a quick overview of OARS, but we consider OARS to be a positive communication skill and one that we highly recommend. Now I'm going to continue on with some very brief recommendations for positive communications that I also teach in my class. These are very brief. The moment I explain them, you'll be able to use them. And students in my class say, learn it on Saturday, use it on Wednesday. So they learn it and they're immediately able to use it with friends, family, and clients in the days that immediately follow. And this you probably have heard before, but it's a recommendation just from social work practice wisdom to not use questions that begin with the word why, but to take every why question that you have and convert it into a what question. What we gain by this is we reduce the other person's tendency to feel criticized or to feel defensive. If you think about it, why questions make other people feel defensive, or there's a very high probability the person will feel defensive. Why did you choose to wear that today? Why are you drinking that? Why did you style your hair that way? You know, all of these things put us on the defense as we get ready to defend our reason. But if you rephrase these things into what questions, then that defensiveness goes down and it just becomes a lovely open-ended question. You know, what made you choose that style? What makes you like tea in the morning? These are broader questions. They're more in the spirit of what Rogers had to say with unconditional positive regard and empathy. In terms of the way they open up a conversation in a positive way. So take the word why and nuke it, eliminate it from your conversation and replace. When that why question bubbles up within you, just convert it to a what question before it is spoken. There's another recommendation from the social work textbook, and they call it seeking concreteness. And this one very simply is that very, very often in daily communication, we don't hear or we don't understand what the other person just said at its most surface level. Either the person has an accent that we're not familiar with, or they're speaking at a low volume, or the way that they have expressed their words are unclear. There's something maybe a little bit unclear about their verbal expression of words. Or there's a noisy environment, or we personally are distracted by our own internal thoughts and feelings. So for any of these reasons, and perhaps for several other reasons, we just simply don't hear what the person has just said. And when I ask my students, who here sometimes pretends that they've heard what the other person has just said, even though they really didn't, nearly everyone's hands go up. It's very, very common that we pretend we have heard what they just said because it's awkward to stop the person and say, I didn't understand you. Or it's awkward to say, geez, in that moment, my mind went to something else and I missed what you said. Could you repeat yourself? So to avoid that embarrassment, we just pretend we've heard them and we keep nodding. But we definitely missed something important by doing that. We take a risk by pretending that we heard when we haven't. So the suggestion here is that we stop whenever we have not heard the other person and we say to them something like, could you say that last part again? Or I think I missed something there. Could you please repeat what you just said? That we never let it pass when we really haven't heard. That we stop each and every time and turn to the person and say, I missed what you said. Could you say that again? Believe me, the conversation partner will appreciate this. The next suggestion is from the motivational interviewing literature, and this suggestion is that whenever we give advice or we provide information, we couch it in two bookends that we call elicit, provide, elicit, and each elicit is an open-ended question. Now, in our work as social workers, we can't use reflection and open-ended questions all the time. We can't really do our jobs. There's time when we have to give advice or we have to provide information. But the recommendation from the motivational interviewing literature is that whenever we provide information or give advice, we couch it in the elicit, provide, elicit framework. So the first elicit is an open-ended question, and then we provide the information, and then we close this frame of communication with another open-ended question. So I'm going to give you an example. Very, very often in social work, we explain to the client what the confidentiality policy is and the limitations of confidentiality. Now, when time is short, we can be really tempted to just launch into an explanation of what the confidentiality policy is and what its limitations are, and we just quickly verbalize these rules about confidentiality, and we move on to the next thing we have to cover with the client because we're in a hurry and we have to get through it. But it can be very productive to slow down just a little bit and start off with an open-ended question and ask the client, what might you already know about confidentiality? Because many of our clients have been in treatment before, they've been involved in the system before, they've heard the confidentiality rules elsewhere before. And if we stop and ask them what they already know, first of all, we don't wear ourselves out by verbalizing so much dialogue. We stop and we let them tell us what they already know, which is a very respectful thing to do. And then when we provide the information, all we have to do is fill in the gaps of what they what's missing from what they've told us, instead of telling them the whole story where we're telling them things they already know. And then after we provide any missing information, we close with the final elicit, which is another open-ended question that basically says, what do you think about that? Or how do you feel about that? Or basically, how does that land on you? So that's the basic idea of elicit, provide, elicit, and it can be used anytime we're giving information or providing advice. We could say, I went through something similar. Would you be interested in hearing what worked for me? That might be an initial elicit before we tell about our own experience and what worked for us. If we're about to explain the whole plot of the Harry Potter series to another person, before we launch into that information, we might ask them, what do you already know about Harry Potter? That way I don't tell someone something they already know. Another helpful communication skill related to positive communication and having positive conversations is an idea about emphasizing control and personal choice. Even though we really want our clients to do the right thing and to grow and to heal and to become better and to improve, at the end of the day, it really truly is their choice whether they take our advice and whether they do what we recommend. And to make that clear to them can be helpful and can be freeing for them. Now, when do you emphasize control and personal choice? You can do it when you notice that you're pushing really hard for someone to do what you want them to do, or that you're repeatedly pushing someone in a certain direction. When we catch ourselves doing that, it's a good time to step back and say, of course, the choice is yours. You can emphasize control and personal choice when you notice that you really want someone else to do it your way. When you catch yourself really pushing someone to do something that you really want them to do, and you really feel yourself putting on a lot of exertion in that area, that's a time to say, of course, it's up to you. When you think if only they do what I say, everything would be great. When you kind of find yourself in that position, it's time to step back and say, of course, in the end, it's up to you. And also, when the other person is resisting, so for example, when I recommend something to someone and they're absolutely resisting me, they're telling me all the reasons why they're not going to do it, so they're providing the counter argument, and I hear that coming back at me, then that's a time to stop and say, it's of course the choice is yours. In the end, it's up to you. So this is what it can sound like when you open up the fact that really it's up to the other person to change or to take your advice. You can say things like, it's up to you. The choice is yours. Ultimately, only you can decide. And there's probably several other ways to say it. Another positive communication strategy comes from the positive psychology literature, and that is active and constructive responding. There is a study published by Gable in 2006. The name of her study is Will You Be There for Me When Things Go Right? Supportive Responses to Positive Event Disclosures. And in the study, it brings up certain questions. How do you want your partner to respond to you when you experience something negative? And how do you want your partner to respond to you when you experience something positive? The results of her study suggest that responses to positive events were more closely related to relationship well-being and breakup than responses to negative events. And I might say here that her research was about couples involved in a romantic relationship, but what she has to say applies to any relationship or any conversation with another person, that it's really important how we respond when other people tell us good news. And it might even be more important than the way we respond when the other person tells us bad news. So a type of responding that Gable recommends, called active and constructive responding, was associated in her study with well-being, with higher relationship quality, with commitment to the relationship as it is now, with commitment to the relationship into the future, with love, intimacy, trust, and satisfaction with the relationship. So responding in this way, called active and constructive responding to good news, can help pay off in all these areas. So what do we mean by active and constructive responding? It's kind of a 2-by-2 table where the way I respond to someone else's good news can either be active and constructive, passive and constructive, active and destructive, or passive and destructive. What do these things look like? Active and constructive responding, which is the style that is recommended, is to respond in a positive and affirming way. Someone tells me that they've just gotten promoted, and I say, wow, this is great news. Your skills and hard work are paying off. Tell me more about it. So active and constructive responding involves being enthusiastic and positive in response to the person's good news, and then asking them to say more. Active and destructive responding is when you'd say to someone who's just gotten promoted, wow, I'll bet that'll be complicated. Are you sure you can handle it? Sounds like a lot of hard work. We hear this, and we sometimes do this with some regularity. Someone gives us their good news, and we start to worry, and what we reflect back is our worrying, the ways that we're worried about what they've just said. Passive and constructive responding is saying something like, "That's nice, dear. That's nice. We're not really taking a great interest, and we're not really getting very enthusiastic about their good news." And then destructive and passive responding is when we completely dismiss what they've just shared with us and we start to talk about ourselves. You won't believe what happened to me today. Check this out. Daily reports of positive events outnumber negative events 5-1. So there's lots of opportunity for active and constructive responding. Therefore, there are more opportunities to respond well to positive events to strengthen your relationship with others. Positive event disclosures are easier to make, and positive event disclosures reveal a person's strengths, so they're very fruitful for response. So let's review the positive communication skills we've just gone over in this third module. We've gone over ORs, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. We've gone over eliminating why questions and replacing them with what questions. We've gone over seeking concreteness, that is, when we miss what the other person has said for any reason, we stop and we ask them to make sure we've heard it. We've gone over elicit, provide elicit, which is a strategy for providing information and advice. We've gone over emphasizing control and personal choice. When we're pushing hard or the other person's pushing against us, we just reiterate what is true, which is that at the end it's up to them. And finally, we've covered active and constructive responding. When others give us their good news, we respond enthusiastically and ask them to say more. So let's review all of the modules we've gone over so far in this series. In Module 1, we provided a general overview to the problems in child welfare work and the stresses that people are under. And in Modules 2 and 3, we provide what we hope will be some useful solutions that can be used to help improve the work environment and your personal experiences. In Module number 2, we talked about some ways you can use the evidence base from the gratitude literature and research and the positive activation and positive activity scheduling research as a way to fill yourself and take good, positive care of yourself And here in Module 2, we provided a journaling practice, which you can use, if you wish, on a daily basis to help make sure that self-care is in there, that personal enjoyment is in there, that life is balanced between work and pleasure. And after some weeks of the journaling practice, when you feel your watering can is full, you can shift over to the suggestions in Module 3, where you pour from a full can, where you take care of others in your life, people you supervised, your clients, and the other friends and family near to you, by using positive communication skills as a way to nurture them, but also as a way to nurture and sustain yourself, because these positive approaches to communication are also very gratifying and satisfying for the speaker. This concludes our series. We hope that these things have been useful to you, that they've been fulfilling to you, and we'd love to hear from you. Please let us know the extent to which you've used these suggestions and the ways in which they are or are not working for you. Thank you.